So what's my problem right
Oh.
now?
Your camera is on, so
It's supposed to be, right?
yeah. I'm just saying, I don't know if it can see me.
Oh. Thank you. I'm so sorry. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording for just a minute.
The challenge is to share my screen. Okay, so I think I do this. All right, now I think,
Got it. Yes.
like magic. Okay, now how do I get this thing out of here?
It'll go away.
It will go away. Oh, okay.
It should go up to the top.
Oh, all right. Well, let's see. I have a menu bar right in the middle of my screen, but it may go away when I get started. So we're going to talk today about creating a bird-friendly yard. Let's see, it hasn't gone away though.
Well, pick it up and move it up.
Well, I'll move it down
Or
here.
down.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I think that's better. Okay. All right. So, I think probably a lot of you feel as I do that birds are a great backyard companion. Whoops. Now it's not moving. Oh, there we go. Okay. I'll have to use my mouse. Sometimes over a period of years, I was surprised last year when I saw this catbird come back, and they can live quite a few years. And I figured out or concluded that this catbird was probably the same one that had visited my yard. And I have read that the same one will come back to the same yard. And the reason I knew that this one probably was the same one is that it took a while to help this catbird realize that we were putting mealworms out for it. And finally, it had figured it out the year before. This time, when I saw this catbird and I put the special dish of mealworms out, he came right over to it. So I suspect it's the same exact catbird. So it's really nice to know that they come back. There's lots of interesting behaviors besides being a companion. Migration and flocking itself is quite interesting. And courtship behaviors, I've seen my cardinals, the male feeds the female the little seeds that he gets, and the cedar waxwings here. And even like the mobbing behavior where the crows get together and escort the hawk here out of the neighborhood. So there's a lot of interesting things. Even sunbathing is that my catbird taking a sun bath. And it provides warmth, drying, and even rids their bodies of parasites. And science studies are showing more and more that more birds bring more happiness and well-being. Yeah, let me try to get this menu bar a little bit more out of the way. But they're also ecologically important. And one of the ways is that they're an eco-friendly exterminator. And they eat lots of bugs that would otherwise be eating your plants. And that was, the way it should be. They create cavities, not only for themselves. This little downy here created a cavity in this dead limb, but other creatures can use them afterwards too. And the Cavity Conservation Organization is excellent. We had the founder speak at our meeting, and the recording is on our website, our YouTube website. So I highly recommend Jillian Martin's presentation about, dead trees in general. They're also nature's cleanup crew. And here's a bunch of vultures eating a dead deer at the side of the road. There were more vultures, but they kind of flew away before I could get all of their pictures, but there was a lot of them. And that's a real service that birds provide. And they also plant seeds. Of course, they don't know they're doing it. They are planning to come back and get seeds, or acorns especially, but they don't remember them all. So the ones they don't remember, they're planting. And if you watch blue jays, they tend to take, I feed blue jays peanuts sometimes, and they take them away and they bury them, and then they put things on top. So they try to do a good job, but they don't remember all of them. Blue jays, just like the downies with making cavities, blue jays are especially important for planting oak trees. And if you've heard Talamy's presentations on the nature of oaks, he talks about the unique importance of blue jays for spreading oaks throughout the world. And there's a lot of jays, and there's a lot of kind of oaks, and they have a really a relationship, and blue jays have been important in that. Whoops. So maintaining a diversity of bird species is crucial. Every bird species has unique properties, and if you lose any of them, you're losing that unique property. And in the more diverse group that you have, the stronger your ecosystem is. So why do we have to create a bird-friendly yard? I mean, shouldn't there just be places out in nature that would take care of it? Well, more and more, we're losing millions of acres of bird habitat, and we're creating these kinds of suburbs, more agriculture, cutting down trees for forest products and so on. And this looks like a horrible place to live. I'm sure they've got beautiful lawns and they're all proud of all that, but what a sterile environment. And we've created so many of these kinds of areas that there's no habitat there. Birds need habitat. This is part of my front yard. They need a place to live. This is looking down from the second floor onto the front part of the yard with paths and so on. And this is later in fall. This is the side yard, again, looking down from the second floor. And this particular year, I had seen a winter wren, which I hadn't seen very often, and I wanted to get a picture of it. I hung out of my bedroom window, looking down, trying to get a picture of it. And I was kneeling on this cold ground for a long time. I never got a picture of it. But when I learned more about the winter wren, I noticed that the Stokes bird book said that they're secretive, feeds methodically in low shrubs on the ground near the base of trees and around fallen dead wood. Well, they were definitely secretive. But also I realized, this is the habitat that this particular bird needed. There were low shrubs. There was stuff on the ground instead of just lawn. There were trees, and I lined my paths with dead wood. So there was a lot of those kinds of places. So for that winter wren, this was the perfect kind of habitat as he was probably just passing through, because I only saw him for a couple days. Never did get a picture though. And stopover habitat is also important, like this migrant here. Migration is a chain whose strength is that of its weakest link. If you were driving from here to Florida and there were no gas stations from Pennsylvania to South Carolina, that would be a really weak link, and you might not make it to Florida. And that's what birds are finding on these traditional migration routes. There's less habitat. There's the habitat that has been here for thousands of years is slowly disappearing, and that's a big problem. So that's something we can provide. It's been said that 2/3 of all migrant songbirds seen were found in shrubs and understory trees, and those were the layers most often missing in the typical residential landscape. And that's one thing that Talamy's books emphasize also, is the importance of all the layers, not just a couple of canopy trees, but the understory trees, the shrubs, the herbaceous layer, and then also the ground layer with leaf litter and all that. So thinking in terms of all those layers and the richness that provides, because every bird needs its own particular habitat. So to garden for birds, first you have to provide for their basic habitat needs, and second, avoid harming them. So those basic habitat needs are basically the same things people need: food, water, cover, and a place to raise young. So first, food. Now we're used to buying seeds in bird feeders and all that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have some of those too. And you know, the seeds are something you can provide, and you need to have easy to clean feeders because it's so important to keep them clean. If you're going to provide food in this way, make sure you can keep them clean. And I've found some feeders are much easier to clean than others. Those tube feeders are not that easy, I don't think, unless you have a better way of doing it than I do. But that's something to think about when you get a feeder, is whether it's going to be easy to clean. And also the area underneath, because you can have uneaten seeds or just the shells and so on. And that area can become moldy and not so healthy. So, you know, you can rake those areas up. So when you're gathering birds into one area like that, you want to make sure you keep it healthy. Another way that's also happens to be easier is to self-serve with native plants. So, you know, I have the seeds I buy and so on, but I also have a lot of food available just throughout the yard. And this little song sparrow's eating some seeds. Native grasses provide seeds, like switchgrass. In the summer, it's I think attractive, and then in the fall it becomes golden, and that all provides seeds. And this, you know, there's other native grasses besides that as well. Herbaceous flower heads. Here's a cone flower, and you can see some of this has already been eaten. The one in back has been pretty much all eaten. But this is what I see in my neighborhood too often. Once the flowers are gone, and we're only interested in the flowers, evidently, you know, you cut all that stuff off. You can think of the number of birds who could have eaten all those seeds there, and yet it's just all thrown out, just as garbage. And we're just not thinking. All we're thinking of is just providing pretty flowers for ourselves, and then they don't have any value, I guess. Xerces Society is emphasizing the importance of native thistles. And I know there's a lot of non-native thistles that are a real problem, and it might be hard to figure out which are the native and which are the non-native, but there are a couple of nurseries starting to sell the native thistles. And if you go to Xerces, they have a wonderful conservation guide to native thistles and how important they are. And so I've been trying to grow some thistles, and I'm still, you know, figuring it out. I don't have the problem that some people who have, you know, acres, and they may already have an infestation of non-native, and then you have to figure out which is the native or non-native. I don't have any thistles because I'm in a suburban area. So the ones I have are the ones I've planted. So it makes it a little easier for me, but that's one thing I'm experimenting with. And, you know, when you buy thistle seed, you know, that's seed from thistles. So I'm trying to provide native thistles, and of course they're good for bees as well, but they're also attractive to goldfinches, especially, in other parts of the thistle. Seed cones. This happens to be a hemlock in the backyard, and this chickadee is enjoying that. And nuts, this towhee is getting a little, this happens to be, our kids live in North Carolina. This is a picture from North Carolina with, I think this was a willow oak down there that the towhee was eating. And if you leave your planting beds a little messy, so there's you know, dead leaves, but also seeds that have fallen from plants that have matured. And the little sparrows, they have a special little dance they do to uncover not just the seeds, but all the insects that are hiding in these areas. So that's a really rich area for food for a lot of birds, but the sparrows seem to especially like that. This is, the chipping sparrows and white-throated sparrows, song sparrows. I'm not talking about house sparrows, which are actually finches. And even in winter, the little junco, which is actually in the sparrow family, they'll find food even through the snow, but only if you don't clean all this stuff up. And I think having a winter landscape with the seed heads of the previous year's flowers really makes for a much more interesting landscape anyway, instead of just plain old snow. But that's a source of food as well. So seeds, nectar is a source of food, like this hummingbird is finding. This was a hummingbird that, I don't know if he ever made it where he was supposed to go in Central America. He stayed through mid-November, but I did provide nectar for him. I only provide nectar in these nectar feeders really early in the spring and late in the fall. And you have to be really careful about these, because the hotter it is, the faster this nectar can go bad. And you have to clean it every couple of days. To offer this responsibly is a lot of work, and I'd rather not bother with it. I just offer it, early, because there may not be as many things blooming, and an early bird might show up, or later in the season. But much rather offer those native nectar plants that the hummingbirds love. Cardinal flower is one of his favorites, and it's a beautiful plant as well. That took me a little while for it to get established, but I seem to have a continuing patch now. And there's a number of plants that hummingbirds like. This happens to be a turtle head. This also happens to be a host plant for the Baltimore checker spot butterfly. Coral honeysuckle, which is the native honeysuckle vine, Lonicera sempervirens, and it's a gorgeous plant. Doesn't have the fragrance that the non-native has, but it is beautiful, and it's a wonderful nectar plant for hummingbirds. And native thistle as well is good for hummingbirds. Now, one of the plants that I really like that you probably won't find in a nursery for sale is jewelweed, and that is the native impatiens. Impatiens capensis, Impatiens pallidus is the other kind. There's a yellow form, but that's one of the hummingbird's favorite plants, and bumblebees as well. The bumblebees love it, and it's a beautiful flower. And there's a bumblebee goes right inside. I really love watching them, but it is one of the hummingbird's favorite plants. And it self-sows incredibly. You can see down here, all those little seedlings come up. I believe I started saving seeds to give away to people. And then I discovered that I believe it takes 2 years to germinate. So if you take the seeds, you may have to be patient and recognize what the seedlings look like. I don't know if anybody will sell these, but they do grow thickly. The fortunate thing is you can see the little root system here. It's got a really small root system, and any area where I don't want them, I can take with just one hand and a tiny tug. I can just yank them all out and throw them on the compost pile, because otherwise my whole yard would be jewelweed. But I think they're very easy to control. You don't have to tug or anything. You just choose. I've decided there's a couple of areas where I let them grow, and if I see them anywhere else, I just have a little tug. Often I don't even put them on the compost pile. I just lay them on the ground, let them decompose. I don't feel they're a problem at all, and I just enjoy the plant itself, but also the hummingbirds and bumblebees using them. Watch out for these mixes. So they're often, they call themselves wildflower seed mixes. They are unlikely to have many native plants, or, you know, it's something that sounds good and easy, but I'd much rather just buy the native plants from our native plant nurseries and know what they are and know that they're native. Fruit, so seeds, nectar, fruit. And it's funny, now this is my catbird. I love the catbirds. They're so beautiful, even though they're just shades of gray. Their body shape is so elegant, and I like their behaviors and everything. It's funny, whenever you see the pictures of hummingbirds, quite often they'll be shown eating elderberries, which is where this one is now. Pagoda dogwood is a great plant. It's this is not the typical dogwood flower. That would be the flowering dogwood. This is pagoda dogwood. Sounds like it's not native, but the pagoda refers to the branching structure like a pagoda. But this also provides the nectar for bees before it develops into these seeds that so many birds love. And it's a beautiful plant, an understory tree. Winterberry, a great plant for the winter. It's beautiful against the snow, but also provides berries in the winter months. This mockingbird had claimed this. This is a very territorial bird. He claimed this shrub, and we have robins that stay over the winter here. The robin had to kind of dash in when the mockingbird wasn't looking, but that's a really nice plant. It's in the holly family, so you'll need the male and female, or at least one male for a bunch of females to get the berries. And some of these, if you have a lot of berries, will even hang around towards spring. This is a robin getting some of those last winter berries in the spring. Service berries, there's a number of kinds of service berries, and when the birds see the berries forming, they can hardly wait for them to ripen. They're checking all the time. They love the service berries. Now, my first service berry, and this must have been like 20 years ago, and no one really was talking much about native plants, and I had read that service berries provide berries, and so I wanted to have something that provided berries. So I went to a conventional nursery, which was all we had here, and they had a service berry. It happened to be the Glenform cultivar, and it was fairly expensive because these are all patented and so on, and they sell them as maybe like a 3-foot shrub, and it was quite expensive. So it grew well, and this is in the fall here, and it was a nice shape and all that. And they said this is the plant they recommend for berries because there weren't that many berries. Wild Ones now recommends the species, not cultivars, even cultivars of native plants, which is often called nativars. And we just Habitat Gardening, for our last meeting, we saw the Annie White webinar that was excellent. She's done a lot of the research on it, and on how cultivars compare with nativars, specifically with respect to bees. But this particular cultivar didn't have many berries. And then I discovered and this was after a number of years when I was just wondering what's the thing with this service berry. The Missouri Botanical Garden, they said that this cultivar has less than 10% of the flowers produce mature fruit. Now, evidently, some people must think that's a good thing because they're less mess of berries. And they said, therefore, it's best in woodland, naturalized, or native plant gardens, especially with darker shaded backdrops, which tend to highlight the form, flowers, and fall color of the plant. Nothing in that description said anything about the ecological value. It's all aesthetics. So that's, you're using plants as decoration, not as a source of life on Earth. And I kept that around for a good number of years because I give tours in my yard, And I would use that as an example of a good example of a bad example. And finally, I decided, well, this is taking up too much space for not providing anything. And I just cut down this expensive serviceberry. And meanwhile, I had planted, smallish serviceberries, just plain species from our native plant nurseries. And they may not have the small rounded shape. Some of them can get, most of them are larger than this. You could prune the species and keep them lower, but I could see the difference in the number of berries. It was just amazing how many berries the actual species produced. So a lot of people think, well, what's so bad about non-natives? I always see birds eating those berries, and this happens to be buckthorn, which produces a lot of berries. And just because it's not native doesn't mean the birds aren't going to eat it. It isn't good for them, though. Talmy says it makes them sick. Another plant down south in our daughter's neighborhood, people plant nandina all over the place. It's heavenly bamboo. And it is pretty, produces beautiful red berries. That has, I think, it's either cyanide or arsenic in the berries, and it can kill entire flocks of cedar waxwings. It's just our birds aren't adapted to it, and yet they still sell it. You go to Home Depot or any place down there, they sell it all over the place. So, and every time I take a walk around our daughter's neighborhood, I tell John, boy, I wish I could bring the clippers and cut these down. It's so sad seeing them. But just because they eat them doesn't mean that it's good for them. And Sarah Stein, if you haven't read her books, I highly recommend them. But I want to quote what she says about here, not just because of the content, but also, I just enjoy her writing style. So I really hope it encourages you to read some of her books. And she was an honorary board member before she passed away of Wild Ones. And her property was in Westchester County. So the thing she planted is especially relevant for us. But she says, sorry, birders, I must now hit this nerve. The fact that a plant feeds birds does not vindicate its use. It's true that without the northward spread of multiflora roses, we Yankees would not enjoy the song of mockingbirds on moonlit nights. But if those rose hips enable one bird to make it through our northern winters, the meadows that might otherwise flourish, where multifloras have invaded, would support many more bird species and the myriad insects they provide in spring and summer, the variety of the grains and flower seeds they offer in the winter, and the rodent diet they serve up throughout the year. One slaps the label weed on a species not because it is without virtue, but because whatever virtues that plant may have cannot outweigh the countless virtues of the entire habitat it displaces. And she was way ahead of her time. I can't remember I think she wrote these books in the 70s. And she observed and noticed all these things, and way ahead of her time, and also a very good writer. So Noah's Garden is her book, Planting Noah's Garden. I don't know if they're still in print, but I think a lot of libraries have them, and you can probably get secondhand copies. And Noah's Garden may be back in print, I'm not sure. And non-native berries are not as nutritious for our birds that evolved with native berries. Now, maybe where these berries are native, birds evolved with them and they may be more nutritious for them, but you have to be careful where you get information. This picture I took at Longwood Gardens, and it annoyed me so because by that time I'd gone frequently to Longwood Gardens and I just loved it. And after I started learning about native plants and so on, the last time I went, I noticed this in their they have different gardens. And I think this area was one that was for, home gardens. And it says attracts birds. Well, this is spreading. The birds may eat these berries and spread them in natural areas. That's not a good message. Feather color. Now, bright colors usually indicate male fitness to females, like this cardinal. But some non-native berries are abundant in pigments, but not in nutrition. So you can get these males that are very highly colored, but it doesn't really indicate that they're healthier and will help the species survive. So that's a real problem. Orange instead of yellow tail tips began appearing in the 60s from the pigment of the non-native honeysuckle berries that were spreading around. And you can see an orange tail tip and a yellow tail tip. Who knows what repercussions, but we're changing how these birds have evolved to survive. And it's a real dangerous thing when we start messing with that. The early season native berries are higher in sugar, which provides that energy in breeding season. This is the service berries here. The late season native berries are higher in fat, providing energy for migration. Like this gray dogwood berries, 39% fat. That's what they need. Now, a lot of the non-native berries later in the season aren't necessarily higher in fat. They'll still eat them though. It's not really suited for them. Spice bush, about a third percent of the berries are fat, which helps the birds migrate. And bayberry, over half is fat, which is why the colonists used the bayberries for candles. So a lot of fat. Now these berries, if you have enough of them, will also hang around into the spring. And that's one thing my catbird loves. When he comes back, he'll always check to see if there's any bayberries left over. But this helps this chickadee get through the winter there with the high fat berries. So seeds, nectar, berries, insects are another source of food. And this little warbler is probably looking for the insects in this Joe pie here. As Bill Watterson says, when birds burp, it must taste like bugs. This little kinglet, generally, they're just moving constantly. But one time, on the outside of our fence along the street, I noticed this kinglet just staying in one area, and I went and got the camera, and he was just really, really busy in there. And then after he finally left, I noticed that underneath the leaves, there was all of these little bugs. So he was getting all of those there, and it just kept him in one spot, which is hard to do with a kinglet. They're usually constantly on the move, but even little big bugs provide a lot. Even hummingbirds, they need bugs to feed their babies and so on. So even though hummingbirds, we think nectar, bugs too, little tiny bugs. Almost all birds need insects except the goldfinches. And they're, now that's one reason they will tend to nest later. Most birds nest early in the season because they want to be feeding their babies all the insects, all the moths and butterflies, laying caterpillars and all that. And so they're more available in the spring. The goldfinches make their nests later because they're interested in the seeds, which take longer. So they nest there among the strictest vegetarians. Now it's interesting. I looked at one of the bird books I had gotten a long time ago, and I thought I would check and see what that said. And it's not that this person was horrible, the author of this, because this was one of my favorite books when I first started out in the late 90s, learning about these things. And it was very nicely organized and all that. I thought it was a wonderful book. But now looking at it, I see that there's little mention of insects, or at least positive mention of insects. We grew up gardening thinking insects are horrible for your garden. And I thought that was, very interesting that there was no positive mention of insects and no distinction between native or non-native plants. It just wasn't something you thought about. You thought about getting the prettiest flowers, getting the cultivar that would, that's one of the gardening things I learned, get named varieties of things, and you know exactly how high they're going to be, you know exactly what color and all that. And we just grew up as gardeners that way. That's what you looked for. And, if they provided seeds or berries, so much the better. But, you were looking for those other aesthetic qualities as well. Tallamy changed these ideas so much from his actual research. And of course, Sarah Stein had kind of come on this idea just from observation. He provided the science for it. And his conclusion is what our native or local animals need to survive and reproduce is native plants, and lots of them. And this really changed the conversation. He's really made a huge difference. And I think it's extended beyond, maybe the small community of people who were interested in these things before. He has a way of talking and explaining things, but still being science-based. And he's just made a tremendous contribution. 7.5 times as much insect food for birds is provided by native plants as by non-native plants. So it makes a huge difference. So to feed the birds, first, feed the bugs. And as a really simple idea of a food web, you get the energy from the sun, and our native plants use that energy to provide food, and then insects eat the plants, and other things eat the insects, and eventually, it feeds us up through all this whole food web. And plants are fundamental, but not just any plant, because the insects evolved to eat the native plants. So what we've been doing is changing out native plants for all these non-native plants. And partly we plant these non-natives because you don't get holes in the leaves. Nothing eats them, and that's touted as a big advantage. But, when you don't get anything eating the leaves, that means you don't have all those bugs. And then you don't have the things that rely on all that. And, eventually, now that's not good for people either. So this isn't just for the birds, because a planet without insects is a planet without people. So anyone who has grandchildren or cares about future generations, we need to have the insects, and we need to have the native plants to have the insects. But native or not, dead plants are full of life. And again, refer you to the Cavity Conservation. They have so much information about snags. And even now, this is a snag in my yard. This is a redbud tree that had died, and it's an understory tree. So it inherently has a much shorter life than something like a sugar maple or an oak or something like that. And it had eventually died, and we left it as a snag, standing up. And eventually it toppled over. This is a small tree. It's in the back. It's not anywhere where it would topple on someone. And it was in a safe location. So we left it, but it did fall down. But even now, I think it's still back there. I haven't looked back there, but it's decaying, but it's full of little bugs and things. And larger insects can eat the little insects, and the birds can eat the insects, and it will decompose and help the soil. So these dead plants are really important. And they have a sign, wildlife tree. This dying tree is fulfilling its final destiny. So that's, a tree has life at the beginning when it's small, and when it's full grown and then in decline. And then the final part of life is of the tree's life is providing the food and shelter for wildlife and nesting birds and other things as well. And you can see the little downy up there getting insects from this. This happened to be an apple tree that had died, and we put the sign on it. And here's a little baby nuthatch getting some bugs out of that. They love these dead trees because they're full of bugs. And I line our paths with the dead logs, and people put these out to the curb, and so we cart them home and put them along our paths. And one day we saw a pileated woodpecker in our backyard, and he didn't seem to care that we were there. He let me take pictures for about a half hour, and he was just so absorbed in getting all the little insects out of these logs that I had lined this path with. It was really fascinating. And the idea is that cutting down a tree is not an all or nothing thing. You obviously have to, depending on where it is, you have to keep safety in mind. And we have a sugar maple that had some dead areas that happens to be right next to the road. So there's parts of that sugar maple that I would have loved to have kept, but we had an arborist come and cut out anything that would be at all dangerous, right next to the road, around a sidewalk. You just can't leave those. But the, that dead red bud in the backyard, or the apple tree, or the pear tree that died, we can leave those. Or you can, if our maple tree ever really does start dying off, we could cut it back to like 12 feet or so. It's not going to topple over at that height. It's not an all or nothing thing. And they have a lot of resources to help you make those decisions to maintain the value and still be safe, because you do have to be safe about it. Another dead plant is leaf litter, and we leave all that leaf litter. There's all sorts of little bugs and seeds and everything. A little fox sparrow and a junco there. They can spend a whole lot of time. They don't tend to come to feeders, but I'm providing a lot of food just by saving myself a lot of work, not having to rake, and that makes the soil all that much better. And I think there is some thinking that plants evolved to grow in the soil that includes the leaves from their own leaves that decompose, and every leaf is a little bit different, and that makes sense that would produce the soil that would be best for that particular kind of plant. So don't be a neatnik. There's one day we saw this chickadee just so active under our arborvitaes, and we watched him for a long time, and he was obviously getting something because he was working really hard there. And he spent a lot of time. And eventually I noticed that he was getting these tiny little worms out of it. And so if we had raked all that stuff up, which most people in our neighborhood do that kind of thing, so that it's all bare underneath, it would have been deprived of all that great food. Afterwards, when he left, I got some of those old stalks and opened them up, and there was a whole bunch of things in there that he was getting, and that's all valuable food. And this downy, he was looking in the top of the stalk. These are milkweed stalks. And there was some, you can see where some of the insects had come out of those. So those could be filled with insects too. That's a good source of food. And they also will stuff things down in them. There's a little seed or something they stuff to cache them away for a rainy day, I guess. And even a mealworm they took and stuffed down inside there. So the category is insects, but also other things too. Now, like it or not, birds themselves are food for larger birds like this hawk. And even the hawk is a species of concern. So I know a lot of people get horrified when hawks eat songbirds. That's what they eat. And if we're really careful about providing habitat, there would be plenty of birds and it would all balance out. They're meant to eat those birds. This hawk actually caught a cardinal. It's sad from our perspective because we like the cardinals, but that bird has a right to eat too. But that's one advantage of not just having feeders. If you have natural foods all over the yard, you're spreading out the eating places instead of just providing a grocery store for predators. And then you also have less disease transmission because instead of all the birds coming in one spot and there's nothing to eat anywhere else, they're naturally just spread out and less likely to transmit disease. But it just makes them less of a target. So you really want that balance of nature, and hawks are part of that balance. So food, water, of course, and bird baths can provide water. The important thing, I've seen actually, I think it was a cooperative extension somewheres, and they were recommending never use bird baths because they can produce mosquitoes. Well, definitely preventing mosquitoes from growing is much preferable to spraying. So you don't want to leave places where mosquitoes can breed. But if you clean them out twice a week, it takes the mosquito a while. They have to lay the eggs, they have to develop into, a larva and nymph and all that before they become adults. So, and you want the birds to have clean water too. But in mosquito season, you need to dump that water and clean out that bird bath and not let those mosquitoes develop. And there's all sorts, if you look around your yard, there's all sorts of places mosquitoes can develop, little, like kids' toys or anything. You really have to try to prevent mosquitoes from breeding. You don't want a yard full of mosquitoes, but you don't want a yard or a whole community with mosquito spraying either, but you can prevent a lot of that. They do need water. Bird baths are great, but you have to dump the water and keep them clean. In the winter, they need water too. And I've always seen on the Cornell website to not use glycerin as antifreeze. Now, that seems like a really obvious thing. You wouldn't want birds drinking that, but evidently people must think, well, you don't want it to freeze, so you put antifreeze in it. This is really not good, but you can use, if you want to do that, you can use an immersion heater. Otherwise, they'll get little bits of snow and stuff, but I hate to see them at the side of the road getting the road salt water, which I'm sure isn't good for them either. But yeah, antifreeze is not a good idea. We don't have bird baths anymore because we've for our 25th wedding anniversary, which is now 20 years ago, we created a backyard pond and stream, which was not a trivial undertaking. Fortunately, our son was still in high school and he did a lot of the heavy digging and so on. But we've really enjoyed that, and provides water for bathing and drinking, and also toads lay their eggs, and we've had frogs and dragonflies, and but we've most of the information is how to make a decorative pond, and we were really trying to have a pond and stream that provided habitat, and so having a variety of depths and in the stream, as well as the pond, the native aquatic plants. The whole first bunch of plants they sold us turned out to all be non-native, and I didn't really know anything about aquatic plants. We had to get rid of almost everything they had sold us. And no fish. We had little goldfish, which I really enjoyed, but then they ate the toad eggs, and it's just, they didn't belong there. They're not native, and we enjoy all the dragonflies and everything so much that we really wanted a wildlife pond, and it's really been wonderful to have. The birds love it for bathing. The migratory birds are really attracted to the sound of the water because we have little waterfalls. So we get a lot of migratory birds and for drinking. So food, water, cover. You can think of how important it is to have a place to hide this little female cardinal here. You can feel that, how safe she probably feels where she's kind of hidden from predators and hidden from severe weather. But actually, as I observed, I noticed beyond just the safety of that, they also need perches, because a lot of what birds do is communicate to other birds. They need a place to sing, to attract a mate, to declare their territory, to watch for food, or just a place to sit. So when I think of cover, I'm also thinking of those perches. And it's just kind of interesting to watch how birds use these things as perches. And this is our dead pagoda dogwood. And this is an example in our last newsletter. I talked about how smaller trees can do so much better. This particular tree, and again, this was from a conventional nursery, and they wanted us, to have a, they sold us a big pagoda dogwood, so we'd have instant pagoda dogwood. And we also had bought some small pagoda dogwoods, and the small ones quickly, well, in a few years, surpassed this mature one, which really, suffered a lot of shock from being transplanted, and it didn't live very long, but we left it up. And it was a really popular place for all the little chickadee babies and so on. It eventually just toppled over, and this was not a big heavy plant or anything, but it served its purpose as a snag for a number of years. But it also showed that buying the small trees where they can develop their root systems, the small trees ended up much healthier and larger and longer lasting. So food, water, cover, and a place to raise young is critical. It's interesting watching the lovey-dovey mourning doves, and they tend to like the top of our grape arbor, it seems. They're often up there. The nest boxes, you don't need a perch. That just provides a space for predators to get the babies. So, a well-constructed nest box won't have perches. Like, as an elementary school kid, you always drew a birdhouse and always had a perch. And this is another wren. She can make her way in there without a perch. And find nest boxes. They're easy to clean. You can put shavings in there so they can excavate. We use predator baffles underneath so things can't get in. Whoops, the orientation is important. And if you look on the Cornell Nest Watch website, they will say, orientation from the sun or the wind or whatever, height above ground. They give you a lot of tips for choosing the best nest box. Of course, the size of the hole is specific to the kind of bird you want to attract. But another way, and we do have nest boxes, but another way that's also easier is to leave those snags. And this was a part of the sugar maple that was safe to leave for a few years. And a downy actually did spend a lot of time excavating a hole and raised its babies in there. It was really fascinating to watch. We eventually the next time we had the arborist come to evaluate the tree for safety and so on, that limb did have to come out. But for a while, it was it worked really well. This is our pear tree, and the two limbs on either side, when we were gone this winter, we came back and they both had fallen off. Then we were really, and this again is not anywhere as close to where anyone would be. But, and it's not a very, it was not a wide diameter limb, but we were surprised to see chickadees there. And actually there were two of them, one in each of these broken limbs. This is just like last week. And there's another one there. Now they eventually gave up on the one on the left because that really is very small. Yeah, I don't know how they could have made a hole in that, but they're still working on this right-hand one. And after, it's got to be more than about a couple of weeks, I think, that she's been working on that, and she's making progress. She was out there still working this morning, and the hole gets deeper and deeper. Now, how this is going to work, where I think the rain could come right in there. I don't know, like predators. It will be interesting to see what happens, because we have nest boxes all over, and she chose this instead of a nest box. I asked someone from Audubon about it, and she said that she did some research and found that chickadees often will like the ends of limbs like that. And we'll see what happens. It's been fascinating watching. She's worked so hard, and she's preferring this over all the nest boxes we have. So it'll be interesting to see. Native trees and shrubs. Now you wouldn't think it would make a difference. You just build a nest in a shrub with some supporting limbs. But they've actually found in some research that there's higher predation of nests built in non-native shrubs like buckthorn and honeysuckle. This happens to be our gray dogwood here. Now, another thing, when you start observing all these things, I'd never really thought about that before. You just figured they're going to find a place to make a nest. What I realized is that how important the nesting materials are. And we kind of take it for granted, but we had kind of tried to make a little bog at the top of our stream here, and not knowing what we were doing, it didn't turn out very well. We couldn't grow bog plants, but the water goes into that area. We left the plastic under there, and it comes out. So we had a muddy area. Well, all of a sudden, even though the bog plants weren't surviving, I saw all these robins coming from all over the neighborhood. They weren't nesting in our yard, but they were coming for the mud. And when you think about it, our neighborhood has mostly lawn and asphalt. Really, there's no mud. There's no natural areas. There's no, and this is the male always came and watched, and the female would, you can see her muddy breasts. She would go away with the mud, and he was protecting her, I guess. But they take the mud, and she had actually, you can see that big hole at the end of our, we did a second pond because we liked the first one so much. And she took all that mud and in moss. And so she's taking all this and the dried grasses. Most people, they cut all that and carted away. And so there's very little natural materials left for nesting. And we don't even think about that, but they need those materials. That's what they make that kind of nest with. This is a robin's nest that after the babies had all fledged, that was in our arborvitae. We took a look at the nest, and you can see the mud in all the straw. And how many yards have mud and straw? We've eliminated something that's so important. I noticed this cardinal. This is a clethra, and she was coming and she was breaking off those little ends of the clethra and carting those away. So that was part of her nesting material. So you never know what they're going to need, but whatever they need, is in short supply in the typical suburb. This is I leave all my milkweed stalks, and they have this fibrous material, and so they use that. This is taken through our screen porch screen, but there was a Baltimore Oriole stripping all these fibers from the swamp milkweed, and a robin. This was a part of the stalk that I had cut, and she wanted that. She couldn't get the fiber off, and she kept trying to fly away with the whole stalk. So I hope she found some of the other stalks. Thistle is a nesting material used by goldfinches, and there again, that late season nesting material. Spider webs, a lot of people don't like spiders, but that's an extremely essential, it's an essential part of building a nest for hummingbirds. It's a very strong material, very flexible material. They need the spider webs, and to have spider webs, you need spiders. And, just get used to spiders. Spiders are interesting too. I don't think we have any poisonous spiders that are going to hurt anybody. And even I saw, I didn't get a chance to take a picture of the bird getting there was a bird found this dead squirrel in our front yard there, and was getting all those little bits of fur to take back to build a nest. So they use all sorts of things. Feeding the young, that's where the insects come in. And this is a wren. There's a little caterpillar. The wrens get all sorts of things, and they're constantly busy feeding these babies. And they stick them right down the throat to make sure they get in there. And also, if you watch, now here's the two parents. One is taking an insect in, the other one is taking a fecal sac out. So if you watch, you might see them taking that out, and it makes diapers look like a picnic compared to having to take it out in your beak. But that's how their nest stays so clean. 96% of birds feed their young insects, and over 90% of the insect larvae require native plant leaves to eat. And it takes up to 9,000 caterpillars to fledge a single clutch of chickadees. And as Talmy points out, these are small birds. You can imagine how many more insects that a larger bird would need. And Desiree Narango she's a student of Talamy's who now teaches at University of Massachusetts. And she found she found where the native plants were in a neighborhood, and they had to go to find the native plants to get the insects that they needed. And it adds a lot of work if they have to travel quite far. The parents get very worn out looking by the end of the season. This little chickadee, the babies were in the backyard, and we watched this adult go over to the side yard again and again and come back with something. And when they were finished feeding at that time, we went out to see what they were getting. And it was in the Monarda, and this little insect here, and that's what they were feeding the babies. And then I went out and pulled apart one Monarda. It was this little caterpillar thing. So that was in that native plant. A lot of people say, I see parents feeding berries to baby birds. Well, yeah, we're talking about getting them to the point where they can fledge and leave the nest. So that's where they need so many insects is to grow large enough to leave the nest, and then they will feed them things like berries too. And avoid harming them is the other part. And that's why I talk about a bird-friendly yard, not just attracting birds. Attracting birds is more like, we want to see birds, but bird-friendly means it's good for the birds too, not just us. So there's lots of things we can do to avoid harming them. The pesticides are horrible. They can ingest the pesticides along with nectar. So try not to, some of these plants are sold with systemic pesticides, which is horrible, not just for the birds, but also bees. And Europe and Canada banned a lot of these neonics, and I think we have or are planning to, the EPA extending the time like for 15 years that they can sell these things. It's crazy. There's also sublethal effects that can produce dramatic species declines over time. So basically, when it comes to pesticides, birds are sitting ducks. It's just not good. It's not good for us either. Keeping cats inside. I think these are Eric Carle's pictures. He's a wonderful artist, but some of his books has some misinformation. It turns out that the domestic cat is one of the single greatest human-linked threats to wildlife. In this book, there's Feathers for Lunch, he talks about, this cat looking, and all the cat could get was just some feathers and didn't hurt any of the birds. All he catches are feathers for lunch. That's not the case. The truth about cats is that cats with bells still kill wildlife. Even well-fed cats kill wildlife, and cat-injured wildlife seldom survive, even if they escape. Domestic and feral cats kill a median of 2.4 billion with a B birds a year. It's a huge problem. Cat bird or cat food. And that, I think that bird probably was able to grow back his tail. And a lot of people say, well, that's just part of nature. Cats, I don't blame the cat. That is the cat's nature. But domestic cats are not part of our ecosystem. The predation by cats of fledgling catbirds made the suburban areas ecological traps for nesting birds. The habitats look suitable for breeding birds with lots of shrubs and feeding, but the presence of cats, which is in evolutionary terms a relatively recent phenomenon, isn't a cue that birds use when deciding where to nest. So, it's a big problem. And one of the solutions, this person that was in an Audubon group down in North Carolina, she had a cat, and she has what's called a catio. And I've seen pictures of catios, which actually are in the backyard where people can sit in there with their cats. And so you can let the cats outside. There's a lot of pictures of a huge variety of catios. So you can let the cat out, but not be a danger to birds. It's a huge problem. Drinking bird-friendly coffee. All of these birds, a lot of our favorite birds, one thing they all have in common is the coffee you drink. And as the Smithsonian has done a lot with this. And as they say, your coffee is stronger than you think. It's critical bird habitat that you can save by buying the bird-friendly coffee. And if you were a bird, would you prefer that or that? And the left-hand side, that's how they're growing most of the coffee in sun plantations. And some of them are called shade-grown coffees. And that only means that the coffee is grown in the shade. It doesn't mean that there is that complete habitat. We knew a ESF professor, and he had done a lot of work down in Central America. And he said, quite often they'd plant some plants for shade because coffee is meant to grow in the shade. So it helped the coffee plants, but it wasn't providing habitat. The Smithsonian's only certifies coffee that actually provides habitat. And it's called bird-friendly coffee. Wegmans has the Guatemalan only the Guatemalan. And there's also Whole Foods has one. You can buy it online, but look for that certification to be sure that it's coming from an area where there's habitat as well as just coffee. And they're also doing that for maple syrup and also for cocoa, because these are produced in habitats where birds would be living. Window crashes, almost up to 1 billion birds die from crashing into windows. It's a huge problem. You can see the reflections here, but also if you have windows that are kitty corner, there was one house that I saw that, that there's no wood or anything. There's a window on both sides. And so for a bird, they'd think you go right through. Or these windows here, there's a reflection that looks like you could just go and land on that tree. One solution is Acopian or Zen curtains. This is one of our habitat gardening people. She did that herself. And, it's an attractive solution. You can still see outside, but those waving strings keeps the birds away. We made our own. This is down south. We did this with parachute cord and hooks and anchors, and because we have a house down there. We go in the winter next to our son's house, and so there was all these windows because it, for solar gain and so on. But we've lined them all with those. This is a local community college. This is their new building, and it's all built with all this glass, which we like to see as people. It looks nice, but you can see, how would a bird know that if you fly there, you're going to crash into a window? And in your home yard, they recommend having the feeders 30 feet away or on the window. In between that, they might get startled and fly away and not see the window in time. So, far away or right on the window is the safest place in your own yard. Reduce light pollution. Most birds are migratory. And of those birds, 80% migrate at night. And you can see how we've changed the world that they evolved in. It's a whole different landscape. And the skyline in Syracuse, is, and in our homes, we light them up just because we're showing off our house or whatever, who knows? That's all, besides wasting energy. It's certainly not a safety thing to light it up that way. But some cities are having lights out, at least during migratory season, and Raleigh, North Carolina was the one example that did that. But it's a problem all year for fireflies and everything. We can't make night disappear and expect to have a healthy ecosystem. Cover pipes. This is this is our umbrella stand, which we left out all year, and we just bring in the umbrella. But we're reading about death by pipe, not just for birds, but they're attracted to holes. So now in the winter, we cover that. We never had a problem that I noticed, but I feel much better having that covered. This happens to be an old olive jar, a glass jar, which seems to work all right, but you can do a plastic jar and just tape it on or whatever. But it is a serious problem. On my website under conservation, I have a link to information about that. And address climate change. This is the biggest threat to birds, the biggest threat to our children and grandchildren and future generations of all life on Earth. And already they're seeing ranges lost in the summer and winter for various birds. And it's only getting worse. There's a plant-bird mismatch. Of course, this happens with pollinators too. Like bumblebee queens coming out in at a time when the plants that used to come out at the same time are not there. The overlap has already decreased by 25% for warbler migration. So there's less food available. It's a huge danger. And, I worry about what we're leaving our children as well. Become a citizen scientist. Now, that kind of data that you see there, scientists can't collect it all. They need a lot of data, and it's data that anybody can collect by following the protocols and being a little careful. You submit the data, you're providing really valuable information that scientists need to address these problems. And, this is people like you and me. You can do that with Project Feeder Watch. That's there's only a few more weeks left of Feeder Watch. I always do it on Sundays and Mondays. So I'm counting today and tomorrow and till the end of April. There's eBird, you can do any time of the year. Great Backyard Bird Count, which is in February, 4 days in February. People all over the world do to try to get a census of what birds are out there. Nest Watch, if you want to specifically monitor nest boxes. And specifically climate citizen science is Budburst, and I'm trying to start a group. Anybody can do it as an individual, which I've done for a number of years, but you can start groups. I don't think they've got it totally operational yet, but I'm trying to start a group for Central New York. And until then, do it on your own. You just do note the phenology, like when leaf buds first come out, first flower buds, when it's in full flower, when the leaves die off in the fall. And so you're tracking those phenological changes. And over the years, you can see how that changes. If we don't track it now, then 10 years from now, we won't know what it was now. So you don't know how things are going. It's really important to get that information every year. And to learn more, the best way is to observe. You'll be amazed at how much you can learn just by sitting out in your yard and observing. I've noticed a lot of things that way. Merlin is less like magic to help you identify birds. You can identify them just by going through and saying, the size of the bird, where it was, the time of year, and all that. But the photo ID, if you can manage to get a picture, it's got a really smart photo ID that gives you some suggestions for what the bird is. And then the really magical one is the sound ID. And you just click on sound ID and you hold it up, and it creates this spectrograph. And as it detects birds, it lists them. This is, we were walking to the local library, and I saw a pileated woodpecker high up in a tree making a cavity. And, it wasn't making a call or singing or anything, but you could hear that distinctive knock. And I wondered if it could detect that. So I held up my phone, pointed to this woodpecker way, way up in a tall tree. And it actually came up with pileated woodpecker. But, it's really fascinating, and it helps you identify the bird songs and also the bird that you're seeing. If it's singing and you don't know what bird it is, and then it's pretty accurate. It's really amazing. And it's free. You just download Merlin, and it's a free app. You're welcome to sign up for our newsletter. We have, information about our own specific things, but also habitat tips. And you can just email info@htcny.org, and I'll sign you up. The Talamy books and the Sarah Stein books are great. And then I don't know where he gets the time, but he also wrote Nature's Best Hope and the newest book, Nature of Oaks. All excellent books. And in the Living Landscape with Rick Dark is interesting because it has lots of photographs. So it gives you ideas of what a natural landscape could look like, and has an extensive appendix in the back and showing layers. My website has like all the information I've talked about today, and you just look under the birds section. And in my whole website in general, the first part of each page is describing my own experiences in my own yard. And then underneath that, on each page, I have resources, so you can find other information that's relevant to the topic of that page. And also reflections, and I happen to have the one with Sarah Stein talking about sorry birders. I must now hit this nerve, because I think that's such a great explanation. But you'll find all that stuff on my website, and you can explore the resources and reflections and so on. I think a lot of you are familiar with the discussion course for 8 to 12 people. That's free on our website. And we just came out with our new native plant shopping guide. Some of them are, Oneana is probably close to you. So we have some of these native plant nurseries. You might want to have one of your own with your own local nurseries, but it's important for people to know where they can get these plants. So the 3 big ideas: birds need insects and insects need native plants. Birds need layered natural landscapes, and we must actively work on conservation in our yards and in the world beyond. Birds brighten our lives with their song, color, and I can't see this, and grace, but their well-being cannot be assumed. Oops. If we were to leave a heritage for future generations as rich as that which we know today, we must pursue a more proactive and responsible approach to bird conservation. What will be our legacy? Not just for the birds, but for my grandchildren and for yours. So, for all those reasons, create a bird-friendly landscape. So, thank you. And I see I went a little over. I haven't done this presentation for a couple of years now, and I had added some things, so I went a little bit over.
That's wonderful, Janet. Thank you. If you have a few more minutes, I'll go through the chat and perhaps
Sure.
you can comment on some of these. Oops,
Okay.
I have to find it. Okay, that didn't work. There it is. Okay. So go through, a lot of people have made a lot of really, really nice comments just as they were going along. Christy put up some links so you can learn a little bit more about our Capital Region, New York, and our events coming up. And also, if you'd like to join, she put up a link for that. Duck really, really made some wonderful comments as that person went, as you went through the program, that person, the pictures were gorgeous. It's hard to capture those birds in photo.
Oh, that's for sure.
Okay. And he was wondering, or the person was, I'm sorry, will it work for feeding birds the seeds if you deadhead the plants and leave them on the ground by the feeder?
I suppose some birds that will, the little juncos and everything, they're always searching all over the place. I think they're probably cued into looking for seeds on plants that are, in a natural state. I imagine some of them will be found. I don't know if they're on the ground, whether, they're going to get wet and moldy. I don't know. I've never tried that before. I kind of like seeing them in the, in the snow. I think they're interesting. I had a picture once that I used in our newsletter, or maybe it might be on my website too. I just think it's more interesting to see all that stuff. But you could try it, I guess.
See what happens. Okay. Beautiful female hummingbird. I saw some robins dancing and throwing around dead leaves in my garden this spring. It looked like they might be finding insects or caterpillars to eat. Then somebody commented that they only put a little nectar in the hummingbird feeders and clean it out frequently. Talking about your comments on jewelweed, adding that's good for poison ivy.
Yes. I had someone come once and get a whole armful of it because he wanted to use it he had gotten in poison ivy.
Okay. And okay, so someone's wondering what type of jewelweed they have. It's just orange in color versus yellow and orange, or yellow and spotted orange. Yeah,
the orangey spotted kind is the Capensis, Impatiens capensis, and the yellow is Impatiens pallida. I'm not I'm not sure there's any other native one here that I'm aware of. But, you know, there's a variation in all of these. There's some may have more of the little orangey spots on the orange kind than others. There's some variation, but those are the only two kinds I'm aware of.
Okay. And also sweet Joe Pye weed. I'm not sure the context for that comment. I'm sorry. I don't remember where you were in your lecture. You were talking about Joe Pye weed for insects, I believe.
Well, I think that bird, that the warbler that was there on that Joe Pye weed, I think it was, you know, searching for little bugs and things rather than the Joe Pye weed seeds or not the nectar. You know, I mean, the Joe Pye is great for, you know, bees for nectar, and when they go to seed, they're great. But I think that bird was probably searching for little insects that happened to be on that Joe Pye weed.
Okay. And now another out of context question. I don't recall the context of the question. Are those a source of allergies like regular dogwood?
Regular dogwood is, I hadn't heard this. Regular dogwood is a source of allergies.
Okay. Would that person like to speak to that? Duck?
Oh, I see. Oh, wait, let's see. Because let's see.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not.
So then how about this? Do eastern bluebirds like the winterberry and serviceberry?
I've never had bluebirds here. I don't have the right kind of area for bluebirds here, so I've never had them. I don't know which things they like actually. There's a book by DeGraff. It's an older book, and it talks about each kind of plant and what each bird uses it for. One thing you have to be careful of, again, this is an older book, and it makes no distinction between native and non-native. It includes, you know, things like multiflora rose and, you know, things that people used to deliberately plant because they thought it was good for birds. So you do have to be cautious, but that one tells, you know, everything that birds use each plant for. But I'm sure, you know, the Cornell's All About Birds has a lot of information on, you know, if you looked up bluebirds on the All About Birds website, which is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology website, or on Audubon, you know, it's a lot of sources of information for that kind of thing.
Okay. And then in the winter, if you see blue pea, it's the bunnies eating buckthorn berries and the sun reaction with it on snow. Okay, somebody's going to cut down, I believe, their multiflora rose. What about pokeweed? Is that an unknown toxic plant to birds?
It's toxic for kids, I know. And I don't think it's toxic for birds. That's a native plant they've evolved with. We had some growing, and reluctantly, I felt I needed to take it down because we do have kids in the area and they look appealing. They are not good for kids. So I didn't feel like I could grow that. Now down south, and my son has a couple of kids, and they have, you know, like 30 acres of woods, and we have a lot of pokeberries down there, and I assume they've told them not to eat them, but as far as I know, they're really good for birds, and that's one way they have spread here. But that is a native plant, and it's a gorgeous plant too, I think. I just didn't feel that in the kind of area I'm in, with kids around and so on, that I really should plant. Down south I would, though, and I make sure I tell my grandchildren they're getting old enough that I can, you know, tell them that, you know, never to eat those.
Okay, okay. The cedar waxwings, love our mountain ash, and Rosa rugosa However, I'm not sure why, but the mountain ash hasn't been blooming its berries.
Yeah, there's a problem with mountain ash. Of course, there's native ones and there's non-native ones. And I think it's, and I've never grown it, so I don't know that much about it, but I think the native one has the problem. The non-native one, I think, is what they plant because the native one has the problem. Ironically, as with Kuza dogwood and flowering dogwood, and of course, it's hard to prove this, but Ptolemy has concluded that the problems with the flowering dogwood, the native flowering dogwood, which is so important, everywhere, but, especially like in the Smokies and Shenandoahs, that the problem has come from the Kusa dogwood. And then, of course, the native dogwood has problems. So then they recommend planting Kusa dogwood because it doesn't. Well, it's just perpetuating the problem. It's, we have to be really careful because we bring in things that our native plants have no evolutionary exposure to. And, the great big berries of Kusa dogwood aren't things that our birds can eat. They eat the little berries of the flowering dogwood. They just swallow them whole. Where the Kusa dogwood berries are native, monkeys eat them. It's not something our birds are going to eat. So people generally plant the Kusa dogwoods, and that's what they sell. But it's, not something that is a good idea, I don't think.
Okay. And
Rosemary,
then, I'm sorry?
excuse me, Rosemary, I wanted to share something about the pokeweed. I couldn't find it when you were talking.
Pokeberry.
Pokeberry, I'm sorry,
yeah.
not pokeberry. This is from the Humane Gardener by Nancy Lawson,
Lawson, I think, yeah.
right, which is an excellent book. And she was talking about pokeweed being a host for the giant leopard moth and for migrating birds. Blueberries love its berries, which feed a whole host of animals. Hummingbirds love the flowers. And yeah, that was about it. But she was touting it as being good for migrating birds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's a wonderful plant. I just kind of reluctantly thought in my situation, I shouldn't do it.
If you have children, it's not good.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so it's not toxic to birds. I tried to uproot it because I heard it's toxic to dog. We have foxes, coyotes here, so I was trying to save them. But I don't know what they're talking about. Oh, bayberry. I believe they're talking about bayberry.
Bayberry, not barberry. Sometimes people confuse the two.
I love the smell. The comments are, they occurred at the time of your statements. So they're not always in the chat. They're not always, I don't have the context of the
Mhm.
comments. So pretty. And then I love the smell of bayberry.
Oh, yeah.
Joe Pye
That's
weed
great.
to know. When I grew my cats, I leave their fur for the birdies to nest. Oh, and here's somebody wants to attract bats as well.
Mhm.
Do you have any comments on attracting bats?
We bought a bat house and here we paint it black. You have to paint it different colors depending on where you are. We never had a bat use it. And I don't know, it has to be a certain height because they have to be able to drop down out of it. And so we've taken it down south. We have to repaint it because being black, it would be too hot down there. We have to paint it a lighter color. So we're going to try again down there. They have that nose fungus. This is a really bad thing. And so, it's worth giving a try. We weren't successful with it here. I don't know. I go to bed early, so maybe I wouldn't see them. Maybe they're around, but I haven't seen bats here, and we weren't successful. But we've been members of Bat Conservation International, which is where you get all the the best information. That's like, Xerces for the invertebrates and Bat Conservation International is for the bats. We're going to try it again down south if we can get the bat house painted. But I would go to Bat Conservation for all the best information about bats.
Okay. Positive, let's see, sapsucker. I'm waiting for the owls to nest. Another option. Oh, Jan, you posted this. Another option for learning how to create a year-round habitat. Todd Winston is doing a program for the Audubon Society. And that's a free webinar from 2 to 3:15 on April 23rd.
Oh, good.
And there's a link to that if anybody would like it. Is there a way to mute the chat box? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. I'll have to check on that for our next program. Who? Do you need to sanitize the bird bath every time? Would vinegar be enough to avoid bleach?
Oh, I don't know. I would look into that, I guess, with either, usually for bird information, I go to the Cornell website, Audubon, or American Bird Conservancy has a lot of information about windows and cats and that type of thing. But yeah, I would check that. We don't even put a bird bath out anymore, so I've kind of lost touch with that. But it is important to clean them, or at least, you need to remove the water. Maybe you don't have to sanitize it every 2 or 3 days, but just to prevent the mosquitoes, you need to dump that so that they never get a chance to develop. But yeah, I would go to one of those websites to really find the best information.
Okay, all right. And lots of thank yous. Your presentation was very informative, very good. Did anyone get the other bird groups for counts? eBird, Feeder Watch, Cornell. Also, Google Lens helps with photo ID of birds. Okay, and then they've given out your website information, info@HGCNY. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful. Is there any way to go back and see the slides after the presentation to write some things down? We will have a recording of this.
And like I say, a lot of the photos and the information and more are all on my website under the ourhabitatgarden.org under the birds section. And I'm trying to get more pictures up there. I haven't been able to get it all updated yet, because I've
Okay,
150,000 pictures.
okay, all
that
right.
I'm trying to get more of them out there, but there's quite a few in, quite a lot of the same information and links to more information and so on.
Okay, so there's an app to get there. Okay, how can we find a nursery by us that sells native plants or has seeds? I am by Lake George. I know that Capital Region New York has posted that to our website. There's a listing of local places, and Lake George, well, you're not in Warren County, you're just north of us. Pagoda dogwood, is it a source of dogwood? Is it a source of allergies, the pagoda dogwood?
Yeah, I'd never heard of that, but I'm not an expert on that. I don't tend to have allergies, so I don't really know. I'd never heard that.
Okay. So would you be able to post a link for watch at a later time? This was beautiful. I'd love to share your link for this watch. Yes, like I said, Christy will be posting that to our website somehow. I don't know how, but she will. That's
And I'd like to encourage you to, if you are interested, the Wonderful Life of a Dying Tree presentation by Jillian Martin that she made to our group that is on our YouTube HGCMY YouTube. And it really enlarges your perspective of how all that works. She's really good at that.
Okay, thank you. Is it okay to put Lynn from the dryer out for birds to make their nests?
No,
No.
no, that's one thing that Cornell always warns about because it can get damp and, no, it's not. That's something they always advise against.
Okay,
Now, really, that so often and over the years, I would say that's one way my perspective has changed is, at the beginning when I first started this, you want to do things, you want to, things that make sense to you as a person. But over the years, I'm finding more and more, the best thing I can do is try to restore what they've evolved with, what was always here, the little bits of little twigs and dead grasses and all that kind of stuff, moss and stuff. That's what they need to make the nest, not something that we invent that sounds like, oh, that would be nice and cozy, to have the dryer lint. Of course, I don't have dryer lint because as a climate thing, I haven't used my dryer for probably 20 years, maybe once or twice when my son came home from college or something, but I hang all my clothes out and, using fossil fuel to dry laundry that the sun can do for free is I think an important change. And it's a wonderful time. You get out in the early morning and listen to the birds and hang the laundry. That's you can get pretty efficient at it. So that's I don't have lint.
okay. Well, that person clarified that they use organic cotton and clean laundry detergent, but I think you've made your point. And
Yes,
somebody else-
it's the moisture and everything, I think.
okay. And somebody's commenting that the little brown bats are making a comeback.
Oh, that's good.
And when will the recording be available on the Wild Ones website? That's a very good question. Christy, can you respond to,
Which was my wedging blocks.
we don't have the details at the moment. I'm sorry. As long as you registered, we have your email and we'll send out a message once we have it all set up for you. And somebody's got a question. They've got a bird picture and they want to know what bird it is. Well,
Oh, well, if you can submit it to Merlin, if you have the phone app
okay.
and you can choose, choose a photo. You don't have to have just taken it with your phone. You can choose a photo and it's remarkably good. I don't think you can do it on the desktop. I think it's only the mobile app.
Okay. Okay. And then Christy has posted where we do list information about local nurseries that sell native plants for the person in Lake George who was asking. And if you're not in our area, check out the Wild Ones Journal. And they had a bunch of ads in there for places for native plants. Any further comments or questions? That was a wonderful presentation.
No, thank you. I haven't, I used to do these all the time until 2 years ago. So kind of gotten rusty, but.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so very much, Janet. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for all your work getting new chapters. I think it's really exciting that we're getting more people involved.
Okay. We've got one more message. Thank you. Oh, okay. Nope. Just thank yous.
Okay.
And thank yous. Okay. You have a wonderful day now.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. So I will end the meeting and end the meeting.